Okay, good to see you guys. We're in the section on family and home relationships, studying there in the book of Proverbs. This is a two-part study. So this week and next week, and then the final week, we will also look at. This is a pretty cool section. There's an awful lot said about both parents and children throughout the book of Proverbs, and just practical wisdom again. You remember, Proverbs is simply practical wisdom. Always keep in mind, too, that a proverb is typically a general rule. It is not an absolute. So sometimes you'll say something, you go, well, I've known exceptions to that. Well, of course you have. It's intended to have exceptions, but he's saying there's a general rule here that if you do this, then here will be the end result. So there's consequences, but not all activities end up absolutely with the same good or bad consequences, but he's giving a general rule through it. All right, he begins in chapter 10, verse 1, very first of the large section of Proverbs, chapter 10, verse 1. The Proverbs of Solomon: a wise son makes a glad father, or brings joy to his father, but a foolish son is the grief to his mother. The first thing I would say is, isn't it interesting where Solomon begins with the proverb? He begins with the family. That's the first thing he starts with. That's the place that everything begins and everything is set up for the future of that child. All right, so comments about that. What would be some of the conclusions and some of the things that you would want to bring out with that? I mean, it seems pretty simple, but obviously take it a little further. Go ahead, Jerry. You look like you got something on your mind.
I'm just laughing because it's the dad who's happy with mom who's sad. You know? So you can certainly draw some conclusions there, but I think in the same sense as son also applies to daughter.
Well, sure.
It's just saying your parents are happy.
That's exactly right. It's a poetic way. You know, this is a synonymous parallel. It's a poetic way of saying whether father or mother, here are these end results. But you're right. It is funny. Dad's really happy when he's doing well, and mom is wanting to kill him when he's not. You know? sometimes that's the way it is as well. Anything else there?
The joy of a proud father it just comes out of him like a fountain.
Yeah, that's right. And you just think of the joy that parents have when their children do well, the absolute grief and horror when the children do not do well. It is amazing. We parents, everything is tied up there. You can have everything else in life going well. If your children are not doing well, you're not doing well. And it is a grief and a pain in of heart for all your life. They're just not much worse. Wayne.
There's a lot of ways to lose a child, and some of them it's worse to lose them while they're living in prison or into drugs or bad things. But a person that bears a child, a mother, is especially emotionally, psychologically damaged when that precious baby that she gave birth to, something happens. And
spend all this time nurturing, all this time raising, doing all the things that you did, loving, etc., and then the child goes the other way.
Get over things a little easier. I don't think women ever get over things.
No. Well, I don't think either mom or dad are going to get over it. I'm certainly not if that happens. 13:1, along with this, a wise son heeds his father's instruction, but a scoffer or mocker does not listen to rebuke. So the first proverb dealt with how the parents are affected. What is this effect here? Yeah, Jacob.
Just the willingness to take advice and the willingness to listen from the wise son as opposed to the scoffer that's just not willing to listen to anybody.
Yeah, so just to, if you're again, Solomon is writing this to his son. So imagine his son listening to this, and he says, "This is basically who you are. If you heed your father's instruction, you will be counted as a wise person. If you do not listen to rebuke, if you're a scoffer, this is who you will be known as. A scoffer, somebody who is a mocker, that's who you will be. So it's like reputation here, for one thing. Yeah.
Is there a level in which you can look at instruction and rebuke as instruction is pre, rebuke is post?
Okay.
So it's like not even, if you listen to the instruction, that's the stuff beforehand.
Yeah.
Hey,
That's a great observation. Yeah.
But the rebuke is the after. He's not even listening to, you screwed it up, and we're telling you how you could have done better.
Yeah.
And he's not even listening to that.
That's a great observation. I hadn't noticed that, but that's really good because you would see the instruction, and then he gets older and he just scoffs at it and mocks at it, and then he's rebuked and he's not going to listen. So that's when you just kill him, and you go, I don't know what happened to him, God. I just had to kill him. That's the way it is. Yeah, it's really, really terrible. Good. Chapter 15, verse 20. He's got a number of these right side by side here, obviously separated by some chapters here, but still they have a build there. 15:20, a wise son makes a father glad, but a foolish man despises his mother. All right, how does that change the emphasis? What's the one thing different about that proverb than the previous ones that stands out?
Foolish man's view of his parents.
Okay, now he's saying, well, just imagine this. Can you imagine speaking to one of your children and you say, I had no idea you hated me this much? Child's like, what? What are you talking about? I don't hate you. Oh yeah, you despise me. What? What are you talking about? I don't despise you. Yep. Let me read this to you. You are foolish, and you don't do what's right, and you don't listen, and you obviously despise us. So actions here are defining what really is happening. And it is a great definition. And when I was studying that today, last night, I thought, I missed that little one. As a parent, you're always thinking of really good things that you can say to your children to kind of wake them up. So I missed that one. I missed the one where you say, I didn't realize you hated me so much. I didn't realize you despised your mother. What? What are you talking about? Yes, absolutely. You hate your mother. So, pretty good statement there. And of course, the fool rejecting instruction is the implication then of a fool. All right. Anything else? Yeah, Chad.
I keep thinking about Solomon's personal life. Whenever he read in Proverbs, I know how much bearing is his personal experiences.
Yeah.
Maybe not the ideal father. He had a father that was after God's own heart. He had a brother. I mean, we just go through the list here. How much bearing is his personal experience?
Yeah, and that's always interesting to know of Solomon's end result as a person, but see him then give all of this instruction. And we don't have a hard fast answer as to when he actually wrote this. But certainly as he progressed in his life, he began to violate some of the very things that he wrote. And of course, this is Solomon's considered the wisest man who ever lived, and the reason he is because God is the one who gave him the wisdom. So he is putting down the wisdom. Think about it this way. and I've mentioned this before, there are times, and especially early in my preaching life, where I would be preaching a sermon and I would look down at my wife, which I try not to do because I don't like to see the faces she makes at me. But I look down at her and she's like, you're preaching, you're preaching something, why don't you do it? I'm like, well, I don't preach me, I try to preach this, and I don't always meet up to it. So get off my back. At least I'm admitting it here publicly, yes. But there, and that's really true. Can you imagine being any of the prophets? The Apostle Peter. Peter preaches all kinds of stuff against having prejudice toward Gentiles and accepting them in the kingdom and all of this. And then in Galatians, what's he do? He refuses to eat with them. And you're going, hey, Pete, what's going on here? You in the book of Acts, you were whacking on this. And then all of a sudden, there he is. So, it's a challenge in that way. And Solomon, you can certainly see those blips in his life. All right. We did 13, verse 15, chapter 15, verse 20 of Proverbs. A wise son makes a father glad, but a foolish man despises his mother. We did that one. 17:21. He who begets a scoffer does so to his sorrow, and the father of a fool has no joy. Okay. How would you give a little more twist then? All of these are very similar. What would be the twist that's a little different here?
I'm not sure that this comment necessarily applies to the scoffer, but the foolishness and the wisdom of all of these, it seems like he's writing to the parents of a teenager. Now that wasn't our experience, because parenting teens was, I think, my favorite phase of childhood. But the typical teenager that people complain about and whatnot, but it seems like the Proverbs here are saying, okay, yeah, boys and girls, they go through this phase, but eventually they're supposed to grow up. And it looks like people aren't growing up.
Okay, really good observation. I think that's spot on. One of the things that sometimes we don't think about as we read these, we tend to just think about the child. Dumb child, dumb child, dumb child, doesn't respond. But there is a lot to be said here to the parent. Imagine being the parent and you have a little boy and a little girl or whatever, and you're reading this, and he says, you beget a scoffer and you're going to do so to your sorrow, and you as a father become a father of a fool and you're going to have no joy. So how much effort do I want to put in to my children so I don't end up in that condition? Same thing is true about marriage. These are relationships, the marital relationship and the parent relationship are relationships that are extremely devastating to your joy and your happiness. And if you don't put everything you have into them, you can suffer some very serious consequences to the result of that. So it really says a lot about the parent, him and herself, about how much effort they're putting into this, so that they don't end up in sorrow and don't end up in this situation. By the way, in the Hebrew, it's interesting that the Hebrew word for scoffer is not as bad a person as the Hebrew word for fool. There's two different words, and the fool is considered a completely godless and hopeless individual, just absolutely hopeless. And so it is interesting to that scoffer is one thing, but fool, he says, he just shows is something else. And it's interesting how that reads in the Hebrew. I thought of one other thing here, and I don't know if this you can tell me right or wrong here, but I don't know. When he says, "He who begets a scoffer," observations. What might he be saying?
I think this passage is speaking to the father's ability to not only sire children, but turn them into fools.
But to
turn them into fools.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
I have some impact and some control, not complete, on how my children turn out, and it is my role to raise sons and daughters that don't embrace foolishness and scoff for their entire lives. They may have a period.
Yeah. Absolutely, and I think that's interesting about that word beget. And as any parent knows, kids come out pre-programmed. I always thought that the first, when I got the first one, I thought, oh, nice blank computer disk drive here, and I fill it up. This ought to be a piece of cake. And then I found out, wait a minute, this thing's 90% pre-programmed. I got to erase some things on this program. I've got to refigure it. I got to do all these things. I've read some studies, by the way, about twins who were separated at birth. And they studied them, their upbringing and etc. And they actually invited the parents who didn't know each other and never had connections to go through this study. And they did this with many twins who were separated at birth. And the end result was fascinating. The twins, regardless of what kind of family they grew up in, had the exact same characteristics in all kinds of different ways, except one. The one area the parents had ability to change their particular child and guide their child was in spiritual and moral ways. That was interesting. Yeah. Everything else, the kids lined up, even though they grew up in a entirely different culture, a entirely different family. The one thing that was the variant, you got a pre-programmed kid. That kid's going to be what? Well, maybe he's going to be loud and boisterous and all this. Maybe he's going to be this or that. Maybe he's going to be quiet and reserved. There's all kinds of different character traits. But the one thing that the parent had control over, and be able to influence that child in moral and spiritual directions. I thought that is fascinating, Wayne.
So much that we see about what's going on in school systems now and what society's trying to do to our kids, you really realize that foolishness is a communicable disease.
Yes,
and
it
if
is.
you don't keep your kids away from the people that influence them,
Or at least train them and prepare them.
that's a part of the game.
Because they've got to be prepared.
You just can't shove them off on the
Oh yeah, it's our responsibility. Look at 17:2. A wise servant will rule over a son who causes shame, and will share an inheritance among the brothers. All right, that's pretty interesting, and I think fairly true, even in our day. So what's the main thing you'd want to point out here?
The value of wisdom is prized even in slavery.
Okay, good. Yeah, wisdom is prized even among a slave or a servant who would normally never attain anything other than being a servant. But in this particular case, because of wisdom, he gets elevated over the son. And he then is the one who would actually sit down with the brothers, the other kids, and share in the inheritance. So he then emphasizes the great value of wisdom, but at the same time emphasizes how devastating foolishness can be. that it's something that absolutely can reverse a person's life, regardless even of what their normal inheritance might be, or rule might be, or the family that they might be in, etc. So very, very powerful, indicating that emphasis.
Blood is thicker than water.
Yeah.
Wisdom is thicker than water.
Yeah, good. That's exactly right. All right, and then 20, verse 20. Whoever curses his father or his mother, his lamp will be put out in deep darkness. Okay? Whoever curses his mother or father, his lamp will be out in deep darkness. What do you think? Do you remember Old Testament in the law of Moses, what God said about children who curse their mother or father? Pardon?
Stoned outside the cave.
Yeah, they're taken out and killed. Not just they're in the same, right in the same context. He says if anybody who hits his mother or father be taken out and killed. But even if they curse their mother and father, you're out. That's it. And that's what he emphasizes here. But by the way, your cross references there on that would be they're cursed, Deuteronomy 17, verse 16, or they're put to death, Exodus 21, verse 17. So Deuteronomy 27, 16 and Exodus 21, 16. This is a warning, I think the strongest warning we've seen so far to parents. So you become a new parent and you read this and you realize that if your child ever curses you, they are cut off from God, cut off from Israel, cut off from everything that God had planned for them as far as a covenant relationship. And of course, in the law of Moses, they are put to death. So what's that going to do to you or for you as a parent? Danny.
Leaves you barren. You don't have children. You don't have anything to look back on except sorrow.
Okay. Yeah, and so the emphasis then is, what am I going to do as a parent? There's a lot of diligence that's going to have to come about here, right?
If you don't have a long-term view of what's going to happen to your child, you're only going to be focused on what makes this child happy now, what gives me ease now, instant gratification. If you don't have a long-term view.
That's right. That's right. You got to have that long-term view of what is going to be the end result of these children if I am not diligent as a parent. And you bring up a very good point. As parents, and especially when we get more than one kid, we get in this mode where what can I do to shut them up and give me a little space and give me whatever, or I don't want to have to get up and take care of this. I just want to be able to say, I told you not to, now stop it. Are you going to stop this? How many times I've tell you to stop this? You know, you need to stop. Hey, stop this. And pretty soon your jugular's coming out, and all of this. Need to take care of it. Because if we don't take care of it, then the end result is we're going to lose our child. Now this is nothing compared to what's going to happen, what we are aware of that happens today if we don't raise our children correctly. They're going to lose their soul eternally. And that is really critical. So it teaches us not to put ourselves first in this, because this is a life or death endeavor for our children. Big warning to parents. And parents today don't often think, as Mara said, toward that long term. All right, anything else? Yeah.
I think the passage is what talks about those with no hope. And there's a foreshadowing of God here too. When you forsake God, when you curse God and say no more, the light has gone out in your life.
Yes. Yeah, that's a good way. Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. Yeah, the light has gone out. Very, very true. All right, look at Proverbs 23, verse 24 and 25. Proverbs 23, verse 24 and 25. The father of the righteous will greatly rejoice, and he who begets a wise child will delight in him. Let your father and mother be glad, and let her who bore you rejoice. All right? Now, a little twist again. Some of the same principles, but a little twist here. What are the observations you would have?
The diligence is paid off. It almost, you can see them
Okay.
crossing a finish line with their arms raised.
Yes.
We made it. We did it.
Good. Yeah, there's that payoff, and that's the same thing I thought too, is he really kind of shows a payoff here of the end result of years of work and effort that is put forth, as opposed to not putting forth that diligence and then ending up in misery instead of joy during that time. Look at this text, especially those last words. Let your father and mother be glad, and let her who bore you rejoice. I would suggest that I think that's probably speaking as much to a full-grown adult child as he would at all to a younger child. A younger child's not going to be impacted with this. I've known fathers, parents, who thought that once their children got out of the home that they just needed to no longer really act as a parent. And I've always disagreed with that. If my boys start doing things that are wrong, I'm not going to sit back and let that happen. I'm not going to watch that take place. But I've talked to fathers who went, well, you know, what are you going to do? You know, they're on their own now and whatever. Really? This is how you look at this? How old were Eli's sons when they were doing wrong? Yeah. They were older. They were married. They were old enough to go and have affairs with the women who were gathering at the tabernacle. These aren't teenagers here. These are grown men. And Eli is condemned because he allowed it to happen. You didn't tell your children no. Remember how Eli talked to them? Now, sons, you know you shouldn't do this. You know? Do something. Be a father. You're never not a father. And it doesn't end just because they're 21 or because they left the house. It is still an important part of it. You may not have an effect on them, but you need to let them know that this is not the way you raise them, and it is not what I would expect from you. And it's going to be a different kind of relationship.
I think that speaks to the concept of we need to have the hearts of our children in our hands and hold them.
That's right.
Because the difference is when my 10-year-old or my 12-year-old does something, I can discipline them. There are varieties of ways that I can impact, especially a younger child that's in my home. The older a child gets, and especially once they leave your home, your ability to discipline them is primarily based on how much influence they allow you to have.
Yeah.
And if our desire is to have influence on our children as they enter their teenage years and then leave home, we have to think of that as a goal and not solely concepts like obedience, because it doesn't really matter if my child obeys while they're in my home, if when they leave my home, they no longer obey those precepts, and they also don't want me to talk about them.
Yes. And you hit the nail on the head here. You know, when God in Malachi talked about the beginning of a restoration in Israel, He said this, he says, behold, I will, Malachi 4, verse 5, behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the great and awesome day of the Lord comes, and he will turn the hearts of the fathers to their children, and the hearts of the children to their fathers, lest I come and strike the land with a decree of utter destruction. And then that's repeated in the New Testament in Luke chapter 1. What starts a restoration? It starts in the home. What starts devastation? It starts in the home. And the heart of the father and the child is the goal, not obedience per se. The heart and the hearts need to be entwined together. The more our hearts are entwined together, the more that influence will last all of their lives. And that is something that even after a child leaves the home, you want to make sure your heart and his heart or her heart are still entwined together, which is really has to have a determined relationship. And that's true also even with grandchildren. You want to tie their hearts to your hearts. The person in my life that probably had some of the most influence on me was my grandfather, who was an alcoholic most of his life, but he had the most influence on me because he tied his heart to my heart and gave me instruction about not doing what he did, but showing me the right way and things like that. And that's incredibly important of tying that heart. You see authoritarian parents who aren't looking so much for the heart, but looking for absolute obedience. And they will lose their children when they leave home because the heart hasn't been tied, because it wasn't based on a love relationship. Instead, it was just based on that you embarrass me when you don't obey me. And that was never a problem that I thought about. I don't care whether you embarrass me or you don't embarrass me. I'm going to embarrass you when you get done with you. But most importantly, I want my heart tied to your heart. Our hearts are tied together and tied with God, and that's important. Wayne?
I want to read 6 verses in Psalm 127 about having their hearts also tied to the Lord. Unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain who build it. Unless the Lord guards the city, the watchman keeps awake in vain. Behold, children are a gift of the Lord. The fruit of the womb is reward, like arrows in the hand of a warrior. For the children of one's youth, how blessed is the man whose quiver is full of them. They will not be ashamed when the children speak with their enemies in the gate. You have to get your children ready to face the enemy.
Yeah, that's right. And that's, vitally important. I know when I was going to school, all this evolution stuff was being taught, and my dad would just sit down and go, okay, let's talk about evolution, let's talk about whether it's right or wrong. And he'd prepare us for it so that when we saw it and heard it and were taught it, we were ready for an answer and we knew what it was. And same thing was true with moral things and whatever. We would have those constant discussions so that I was aware and wasn't taken by surprise when certain things came up. And that's just truly important. That connection. By the way, some of you, I think, have probably heard me mention, it's been quite a while since I have, but there was a study made, I think it was made back in about 1975 or so. A study was made about parents who, the relationship between parents who served the Lord or at least went to church. In this case, the study was just about parents who went to church regularly and the effect that it had on their children. So when both mom and dad went to church regularly, the children they had, 75% of the children they had grew up and went to church when they got older. If dad alone went to church and mom did not, 58% of those kids grew up and also went to church regularly when they became adults. When dad did not obey the Lord or did not go to church, and only mom did, 15% of those children grew up and went to church. So now you know who has the effect in the family, and now you know why Paul in Ephesians 6:4 said, fathers, raise up your children, nurture and admonish the Lord. We have a tendency as dads a lot of time to let moms do that because we're gone, we go to work, we do this, all that kind of stuff, and we slough that off on her, and that is very, very dangerous. That cannot be. We have to not only model the spirituality that God wants, but we have to be the kind of person who is the teacher, who is the person that connects the hearts with us. It's far more important spiritually and their growth than it is if just mom does so. So I always remembered that study from a book I read by a guy who was a Christian who did the study, and it was really impacted me really greatly. So that's incredibly important. And again, you know, a lot of times what the danger here too is with dads who work long hours, aren't at home very much, etc. And I realize that's sometimes challenged with the kind of job you have, but you have an eternal effect on these children. And if you're basically absent, even though you eventually come home at night, but you're basically absent in your effect that you have on your children, it is going to show years later. They need you. They need to see you being a person who puts God first in their lives. And that's why Proverbs keeps saying these things over and over again. Very important. Comments, questions? All right, next proverb. This next section here is as pertains mainly to the parent. Proverbs 11, 29 and 30. He who troubles his own house or family will inherit the wind, and the fool will be servant to the wise of heart. The fruit of the righteous is a tree of life, and he who wins souls is wise. All right, a lot of little things there. How would you, what would you note about that?
One thing about this doesn't single out mother, father, child. Okay? It's across the board.
Yes.
If you are the troublemaker, you don't heed to teaching and learning, play the fool, you're going to be really
Yeah, and that's right. And yeah, I think that's an interesting progression. Well, before I say anything, go ahead, Adam.
I think it's very well connected to the last verses about how you beget a fool and those things. It's always interesting when you get to spend time in other people's homes, or you kind of recall back to when you were a kid and you spent time in a friend's home, and it's always interesting. Like, what's the situation when Dad comes home? Is that a joyous occasion? Do kids want to see Dad? Does Dad want to see kids? Is that something that people look forward to, or is that an immediate mood drain?
Yes.
Is the household now more somber or more
Walking on eggshells.
Yeah, we don't want to mess with Dad because he's had a hard day, and if he has a hard day, he might take it out on us.
Yeah.
And the same thing with mom or whatever. But I think it's important that we are sensitive to those sorts of things, because I think about some of that as I've known fathers who troubled their households, who, whether through a gruff tone or a disciplinarian nature or whatever, they did not bring comfort and peace and safety to their children. They brought what the children felt like was trouble.
Yeah.
That inheritance that they had in the end has frequently been, in my experience, children that fell away, or children who maybe didn't fall away but didn't really have a longing desire to be with their parents.
Right.
Because that nature did not call them that.
So true, so true. And again, the constant underlying principle here: follow this. Here's what you get. Follow this, you're going to inherit the wind. You're going to trouble your house. You're going to be lower than a servant, and the wise of heart are going to rule over you. How do you think the last part of this, the fruit of righteous is a tree of life, he who wins souls is wise? How do you think that applies there? You saw the fruit of the wicked. Note the fruit of the righteous. Huh?
It's life itself. It's the tree of life. And it's not just now. It's the tree of life. It's life forevermore. It's life in the one to come. So there's such hope.
Okay, so look at it from the parent's point of view. What are you doing as a parent? Go ahead. Pardon?
I wasn't going to answer that.
You weren't going to answer. Well, go ahead and say what you're going to say.
It just seems like one, the full is dealing with more things of the physical nature or worldly or material nature, whereas we'll go ahead with souls, it's wise. And so thinking of eternal and spiritual aspect of the child,
Yeah.
and giving that to them, and planting that seed in them, which is the most important, and carry on in their lives, and they too will then produce that fruit to their children.
That's right.
And it's that tree of life that continues.
And that was the answer to my question. as a parent, you're going to produce either children who inherit the wind, and basically you've got nothing to show for your parenthood, or you're going to be the one who wins souls, produce fruit and win souls, and you're going to be the wise person. It's one of the two, and that's the way you need to look at your parenting skills and make sure, am I bringing these kids to spiritual maturity and maturity in life? That's the whole thing. You know, one of the things that is always difficult as a parent is a child says, I want to do this. This is going on at school and I want to do this. And so you have to get, sometimes those questions are really difficult. Should I let him or should I let her do this or not? And I read something years ago when I was raising my children I thought made total sense. I need to make the decision based upon, is this going to progress him or her to spiritual maturity or hinder them from getting to spiritual maturity? Which is it going to be? Is this going to be detrimental to maturity, or is this going to foster and produce and sow the seeds for maturity? And that is a good way to look at it, so that you got, okay, I can see this isn't going to work. And there were times when I said that to my children. What you don't understand is this is not going to progress you toward maturity. It is going to be a very, very bad experience. I know you don't think it is, but it is. And we'll sit down and talk about why. But that's important. Go ahead, Mar.
How much is verse 30 talking to just people in general? Your righteousness will produce a tree of life within other people, not necessarily a parent-child relationship, but anyone that has a
It apply in any relationship. That's one of the beautiful things about Proverbs, is that you can have a proverb and you can apply it here, 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 here. It is going to have a very, very broad effect, and it's intended to do so. Just the word proverb is the idea in the Hebrew, is the idea of a pithy, small little statement that applies in a massive amount of circumstances and ways. And so the statement is true as well, just for a person who's not a parent. The person who wins souls is wise. That's what we should be doing. You're right. We should be winning souls.
You know, we have a term called helicopter parent now, where you can't do everything for your child. You have to get rid of something.
That is correct. And, again, that's one of those things. Then the next one, a child in the way he should go. There's a lot of emphasis in that word train. The idea of train is the word that's used to train a plant to go in the direction you want it to go. Bend it its will in the right way, and when he's old, he won't part from it. That's a general rule. There are exceptions to it, but unfortunately today, sometimes this rule has become an exception, and there's more kids that fall away than don't. And every parent needs to take a closer look at that. What is going on here? That it has become more widespread, that it seems like the rule is the child falls away instead of the rule is it would be an exception that a child would fall away. And so those are things you might talk about a little bit more next week. Anyway, thank you. You had good comments, good observations, and we'll go from here next time.